Hey guys, sorry I cannot be here today. I was not expecting to not be here today, so we're going to go ahead and go through notes this way so that we can catch up a little bit because you guys are already behind White Day a little. Um, I will actually not be here on Wednesday either, so we may have to do notes the same way on Wednesday. But let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to email me. Seniors, I know I will not see you on Friday because you guys have baccalaureate practice. So, feel free to stop in at some point this week just to see my face so that I can see you. But other than that, we'll get started with the chapter. So, chapter 9 is on inequalities of race and ethnicity. I know you guys have already done the worksheet on this section, but let's go through the notes on it. It's not very long. So we start out with the definition of a minority, and this is the sociological definition, which is a group of people who, because of their physical or cultural traits, are differentiated from the dominant group in a society and treated unequally. And one of the things that you're going to see is that our definition of a minority doesn't actually have to do with numbers. The best example that I can give you here is women. Women are more have a higher percentage of the population than men do, but they are considered a minority group because of the dominant group is not women, right? And so even though women outnumber men, men are considered the more historic dominant group. And so with that, women are considered a minority, even though they don't actually have the minority of the population. So it doesn't have to be just based on numbers. And it has to be something that we differentiate from. We talked a little bit about the brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment. And that is a physical trait that makes people different, but it's not one that we actually sort of differentiate people from. If I asked you to write down what eye color your parents had, some of you probably couldn't do that right now. You may not even be able to tell me what eye color your siblings have. We don't use eye color in a differential group. And so it has to be something that's differentiated based on and given an unequal treatment based on. So this general definition is based on Lewis Worth, and he's the one that came up with the working definition. And with that, we have key features that a minority has. One, they have a distinctive physical or cultural characteristic that can be used to separate them. This could be skin color, this could be facial features, this could be a disability of some kind. But it has to be something that is distinctive. They have to be dominated by the majority, right? So again, eye color doesn't count. We don't use that as a trait that we judge people on. We could, right? In the experiment that the teacher did, she did, right? She separated kids and started judging them based on their eye color and created minority groups based on something that we don't normally create minority groups on to show prejudice. So it has to be something that you do actually differentiate based on. Members of the majority group often consider the minority traits to be inferior. Members of a minority have a common sense of identity and a strong group loyalty, so they actually have to see themselves as a group. And then membership in the minority group is an ascribed status. You have to be born with it. It can't be a chosen group in order to be considered a minority group. So one of the distinctions that we looked at is a distinction of race. And race is people sharing certain inherited physical characteristics that are considered important within society. So people use characteristics such as skin color, but it's not just skin color. We look at hair texture, head form, height to determine race. But there's no such thing as a distinct biological race among humans. It's while you do have things in your genetics that associate your skin color, your hair texture, those sorts of things, it's not much biologically. Your book will talk about this a little bit, and it will say that genetically there's a bigger difference between short people and tall people than there are between people of different races. And so it's something that society has put on society, not necessarily that biologically distinguishes these different racial groups. Um, and it's socially constructed to include or exclude different ethnic groups. So what you see as one race has historically changed over time. Okay, well, do we include this ethnic group in that race, or do we not include them? And so race is a fairly fluid thing, even though we see it as a very structured thing in our society. Racialization is the social, political, and economic process through which a population is classified as a race. Again, we kind of made up what race is and who's included in what race, and that process is racialization. So for sociologists, social attitudes and characteristics that relate to race are more important than the physical differences. While there are some physical differences, how we judge people of races, the skin color, texture of people's hair, those sorts of things, sociologists for the most part don't care about what genetically makes that different, right? What traits go with what races. What we care about is okay, well, how does that affect you, right? How does society judge you on that? How does that change the groups that you're in? And this is going to change based on the society that you live in as well, right? The prejudice is going to change based on where you live, whether you're a member of the majority or the minority group based on your race. So it is different for different societies. We can look at the United States, but you can also look at other cultures and how they view race. And then we look at ethnic minorities. And ethnic minorities are groups identified by cultural, national, or religious characteristics. And so instead of being a physical trait, this is more of a cultural trait that will distinguish you between one group or another. And subcultures defined typically by its own language, religion, values, beliefs, norms, and customs. They have to be separate from a larger culture in order to be considered an ethnic minority. And there are two reasons that an ethnic minority can be separate. One is it could be that they are separating themselves, wishing to preserve their culture, or it could be that it's a result of a majority keeping them separate, a majority keeping them from what we consider assimilating, which is actually what we'll talk about for the next lesson. And in reality, a lot of times it's a little bit of both, right? It's a lot of times of a culture kind of excluding itself, trying to preserve its own culture within a larger culture. But some of that also comes from history, right? Of laws excluding them or making them be excluded. And this isn't just the United States, right? We can look at the world historically, but if we focus on the United States, your best example is if you look at Native Americans, right? There's been pushes in U.S. history to try to assimilate Native Americans and get rid of their culture. If you look at a period of time, we would take Native American children and put them essentially into boarding schools and make them live with white families, trying to make them assimilate. And so part of them sort of wanting to live on their own is to preserve that culture. But there's also been other times where we specifically prevent them from assimilating, right? When we moved Native Americans to reservations. If you read early American law, Native Americans were not considered U.S. citizens. They didn't have any political rights. And so in that sense, that's the United States government sort of keeping them away from society. So you have some parts where the Native Americans, some of their tribes wanted to keep themselves separate because the United States was trying so hard to sort of make them lose their culture. Even as early, if you look at sort of praying towns. But then there are other pushes where the United States specifically set up different rights and different regulations in order to keep them separate and to make them a separate group. So negative attitudes towards ethnic minorities exist in part because of something called ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is judging others in terms of one's own cultural standards. And it sort of creates this us versus them mentality of in groups and out groups that we've already discussed. And with that, um, we naturally think that sort of our way is more right than other ways, and so we judge based on our own norms, right, and based on our own values. And so anybody that has a value that's different than ours, or a norm that's different than ours, we consider to be an outsider, right? And typically that's where you're going to have prejudice and discrimination, is based on those feelings. And this is something that sort of naturally happens based on ethnocentrism. Not that it's okay that it happens, it's just that's how it happens. And so a lot of times, if you look at different places around the world, those minority groups are going to sort of be experiencing prejudice and discrimination because of the majority group having that sort of ethnocentric idea. The amount of prejudice and discrimination, however, is going to be different for different societies. You will see that there are extremes in some societies, and then there are other societies that seem more tolerant of different groups. All right, so the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to, with a partner or a small group of three, I want you to come up with um, an answer, right? It's asking you, is an American culture more of a melting pot or more of what they call a tossed salad in a salad bowl? And so is it that um, sort of all of these cultures get mixed in together and everybody assimilates, or is it that we just sort of live next to people with other cultures and we all sustain our sort of own heritage? So, in the picture on the left, you see that you have all of these, and everything gets melted together to where it's sort of this brown blob um, of different cultures, versus the picture on the right, if the lettuce was Chinese and the tomatoes were Irish and the onions are Italians, right? And everybody still preserves their um, own reality or own culture. So number one, your group has to decide between the two: melting pot, salad bowl. If you cannot come to a general consensus, then you need to split up from your group and form a different group, or be by yourself is fine too. And with that, you need to come up with about a half sheet of why, right? I need you to defend your answer and give me some things that prove it, right? Because we can't just say, well, it's this because I said so, right? So if you think it's a melting pot, why? What's your evidence? If you think it's a salad bowl, why? What's your evidence? And in this way, I'm going to make you have to pick one. You cannot pick both. You cannot straddle the fence and say, well, it's a little bit of one, it's a little bit of the other, right? You have to pick one and defend your answer. You can turn in just one sheet of paper per group, but make sure that everybody is accounted for, right? Make sure your name is on the top of it and I can see. Once you are done with that, I want you to go ahead and pick up a worksheet for lesson 2 and get started on that, and make sure to turn that in before class is over. All right, thanks guys.